But, Tom, you understand the definition of retirement, right? You seem to be working a lot harder now than you did before.
No, because I'm going to leave here today and go back and go do some fly fishing, get on a horse later today probably, and, have the life that I came out here to have originally.
Okay.
The idea of retirement was always the wrong word. The right word was shifting gears, but I seem to have shifted into a higher gear, not a lower gear. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, because you're doing you're doing a lot on TV still. And you know what's funny? I really love this new Dateline that you're doing, the Dateline The Road Back. And it's airing Sunday, August 7th at 7 o'clock, of course, on Dateline. And you're reporting on some families you've been following since 2002, right?
We have. It's since the war, before the war began, actually. We thought we have to make the country aware of the consequences for individual families, not just American families who are fighting, but also Iraqi families who are going to be in the line of fire. Or in the case of one Iraqi-American family, they'd fled at Saddam. They came here, had a good life. They went back to try to rebuild their country. And in each case, there have been moments of real joy, but then there have been some real trials as well. And it's the obligation of the rest of us, it seems to me, to be fully aware of what the cost of war is for people in real human terms.
When I first read about the show coming up on Sunday, the first thing that came to my mind, and I know that you're quite a World War II follower as well. I immediately was thinking about World War II, and of course I wasn't alive during World War II, but the Japanese and German Americans had to have suffered a lot of backlash after the war.
Well, they did. The Japanese more than the Germans in this country did, and we had a huge German population, but the Japanese were sent off to internment camps because they were thought to be threats, even though they had been in this country in many cases 100 years and they were citizens. In about 10 days, I'm going down to a place called Heart Mountain, which was an internment camp north of Cody, Wyoming. There was a huge population of Japanese who spent all of World War II there, most of them from California. Went back, they had lost their businesses or their farms. They eventually got some compensation for that. But the fact that they weren't just in a kind of murderous protest is really a great tribute to that culture.
Now, in your reports, are you finding, is this happening in any level to Iraqi citizens in America?
No, I think where we still have to work harder at is understanding the Islamic faith. I think that gets demonized more than it should. Mm-hmm. You can't blame everybody who's a Muslim for what happens in a mosque somewhere in Iraq or in Afghanistan. And so, the great idea of America has always been that we're a tolerant society with real pluralism and understanding of religious faith. On the other hand, I do think that the Muslim community has to work harder at reaching out beyond their own borders.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, they're pretty insular, and they need to get more mainstream in terms of how they participate, what goes on. There's a huge community, for example, in the Detroit area, and even in New Jersey and the outer boroughs of New York. But they stay confined to where they are, in part, I suppose, because they're worried about what the reaction will be. But we all have to work harder at that. Look, Islamic rage is not going away. It's still out there in too many parts of the world, and we've not done a very good job of managing that or trying to, if you will, isolate the fanatics, and that's got to be a big part of our future.
How can we go ahead and do that when there's Americans that don't want to understand the Muslim faith? Because, and I look at, you hear it all the time that people, the Muslims and this and that and all that, they're going to bomb us and this and that. And obviously they're not as educated as they should be on the Muslim faith. I mean, it has a black eye. How can we go about doing something like that?
Well, you need to have community dialogues. We had a big debate in in New York about a mosque near Ground Zero.
Exactly. Yeah.
Was that a provocative act on the part of the people who want to build the mosque? Mike Bloomberg, the mayor, I thought was very courageous in the way he came out and said, "Wait a minute, we can't blame all the Muslims in America for what happened here at Ground Zero, and they had the property for doing it." Did they have a political motivation? That's not entirely clear to me. But at least it put the issue on the agenda. It's not been resolved by any means yet.
In your reports, you follow an Iraqi family who had a very comfortable life in California. They kind of went back and joined the rebuilding efforts. What inspired them to do that? I mean, it's a big risk to take.
Well, the Nama family was a very prominent family in southern Iraq. They were Shiite. And the father was a member of the Saddam Hussein army, but always resisted his policies. He had a chain of pharmacies in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And after Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, he fought back. And then his life was threatened, and that part of the world, that part of Iraq, became a killing field for Saddam Hussein. So the family barely escaped, came to California, as you say, established a very all-American life. Mm-hmm. But when the war began, they wanted to go back and rebuild their homeland as a civil society, and they've paid a terrible price for it. The father was kidnapped and presumably killed. The family has been divided. It's been very tough for them.
So they had the kind of what people would call the American dream, and they left it to rebuild, and now they basically have nothing at this point, right?
That's right, and I don't know what the future is. One of the daughters is working for a contractor in Iraq. The mother is there trying to get word about what eventually happened to her husband. They have no hope that he's still alive. They paid an enormous ransom and got nothing for it. So we owe it to those kinds of people mm-hmm. who really believed what the United States was doing in Iraq, that it was going to build a civil society. We owe them our attention at the very least, sure. and probably an obligation as fellow citizens.
Why stay then? Why are they staying in Iraq when they obviously, I mean, if they had a better life in America, why not just go back and try to rebuild what they had in America?
Well, nationalism is a very strong instinct in people. Right. It's their country. They lived there forever, for mm-hmm. generations. And their aunts and uncles and cousins still live there.
Sure.
So they felt drawn to it, and they wanted to make it, not what Saddam Hussein had made it, but they right. wanted to make it into a truly democratic society where everybody would have the opportunities that they had in America.
I mean, very courageous. And when you think about the immigrants who went to this country, to rebuild in this country, it's very courageous to go back to mm-hmm. a country like Iraq and try to build up democracy. You got to respect that.
That's right, exactly. And that, by the way, that was the premise of our invasion of Iraq. We were going to make that into a civil society where people will have a vote in their own future. That was the promise that we made to the Iraqis there and to the others who were living in exile. This family, the Nama family, had been invited to the White House. They were made a part of, if you will, the advance guard that would go in there and try to reconstruct the place. But it turned out to be far more difficult than the administration had promised.
Now, you followed the Iraqi war through the entire thing very closely. In your personal opinion, do you think we made a mistake at all with these wars? Are these wars mistakes, or did we do the right thing at all?
Look, that's a very complex question.
Sure.
I did think, having spent time there, that it was a tribal society and that sorting all that out would be very difficult. I did think that the weapons of mass destruction were an unknown. I was in mm-hmm. there with the UN weapons inspectors. They didn't know.
Right.
I did know that Saddam Hussein was a terrible man.
Right.
I could never make the connection between a war in Iraq and 9/11,
mm-hmm.
Right. And I think a lot of other people felt the same way.
Right.
So it was, as I say, a very complex issue. If it works out over the long haul, there will be a terrible price paid for it, but we can feel good that we have helped create a democratic society in Iraq. The chances of that happening, I think, are still pretty remote.
Tom Brokaw, thanks for being on the show. We appreciate it. When you hear the name Tom Brokaw, you can respect the name. You know that he's going to tell you the truth and bring you the best news he can. Dateline's The Road Back. Tom Brokaw reports on the three families. It's Sunday, August 7th, 7 o'clock on NBC. Thanks a lot so much, Tom, for being on the show with us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Tom Brokaw on the morning show this morning. Very, very cool. Very interesting interview.
Interesting, insightful.
It's one of these things. I know you didn't really talk too much, but it's one of these things.
Listening.
You just listen.
Just focused on the guy's voice.
You listen to the guy, and he did the Lilyhammer thing. Yeah, I got his voice is so. I was trying to see if he was going to go in a humorous direction, but no.
He's a very serious guy.
He's a good guy. So yeah, Tom Brokaw on the show. Very, very cool.